I'm Emily, just an ordinary wife in Indiana. If you had met me a year ago, you probably wouldn't have remembered me. My name is Emily Thompson. I'm 32, and I live in the kind of quiet town in southern Indiana where the biggest excitement is the county fair each fall. I'm a wife to Tom, my high school sweetheart turned steady, if sometimes distracted, husband, and a mother to an 8-year-old daughter, Sophie, who's got more questions than I have answers most days. My hair is brown and stubbornly straight. My laugh is a little too loud. And my favorite thing in the world is early morning coffee on the porch swing after the sunrise, while the world is just waking up. Life here moves with a rhythm, predictable and soothing. Our house is a small, weathered 2-story at the edge of town. Sometimes I imagine it dreaming of its younger, more elegant self. Weekdays, Tom leaves for work at the repair shop by 7 a.m., and I'm left to corral Sophie's breakfast chaos and hustle her onto the bus while juggling remote work as a claims adjuster for a regional insurance company. Our neighbors wave over their fences. Everyone's dog seems to bark at the same time. There's something comforting in knowing who drives which car, who grows the best tomatoes, and whose kids are bound to tip over their bikes in the cul-de-sac. It isn't glamour, but it's ours. I've always seen myself as someone ordinary, maybe even a little invisible, never the type to draw much attention. In high school, I was the student council secretary, the girl who always brought extra pencils to exams and joined every volunteer list. I took comfort in being needed, but not closely watched. That sort of smallness carried into adulthood. And for the most part, I liked it. In a town where not much changed, I thought I'd found a kind of security. I mistook routine for refuge. If you dropped by on a random Tuesday 6 months ago, you'd have caught me singing off-key to 80s hits in the kitchen while making Sophie's lunch, or fighting with the ancient vacuum in our hallway. Tom would be muttering about truck engines, wondering when the Colts might have some luck next season. On weekends, we'd meet friends for burgers and beer at Daniel's Bar, or I'd spend hours browsing the aisles of the secondhand bookstore with Amy, my best friend. Most nights, things fell into place with the kind of worn comfort you only get after many years. Groceries in the fridge, bills paid, the good towels saved for nobody in particular. But behind all those normal days floated a little, persistent worry I'd learned to ignore since childhood. The fear that too much calm meant something stormy was on the way. Maybe it's a Midwest thing, or maybe it's just my nature. At first, I thought I was just restless, itchy with the sameness of routine and the predictability of a husband who, most nights, fell asleep in his favorite recliner by 9. Turns out I didn't know the real reason behind that, gnawing in my chest. Not yet. That's who I was. Plain Emily, holding tight to the thin, gentle fabric of my ordinary life in Indiana. Before everything changed, shadows. After the gatherings, looking back, sometimes the smallest cracks let in the most unsettling light. It started innocently enough, just the way these things always do, I suppose. Rebecca had been my best friend since college. Back then, she was the wild one. Spontaneous laughter, wild red curls, always bringing me out of my shell. She was the one who convinced me to go line dancing on campus, the one who sat up with me all night after a bad breakup. After graduation, Rebecca landed a teaching job 2 towns over, but the distance never kept us apart for long. Over the years, we logged endless hours of late-night phone calls and weekends spent swapping stories over cheap wine on my back porch. To Sophie, she was Aunt Becky, welcome at every birthday party, every Thanksgiving dinner. Mark, my
Here's
husband,
the drive. I haven't
was
shown
a
anyone
quieter
else.
sort.
Good, we'll be in touch.
He'd known Rebecca almost as long as I had. The three of us fell into an easy rhythm whenever she was around. Rebecca would bring some homemade salsa, Mark would grill,
Can't believe it.
and we'd eat out in the yard, while Sophie chased lightning bugs under the big oak tree. Those summer evenings glowed like something out of a memory, so warm and ordinary, I never thought to question them. But as autumn settled in, a shift crept quietly into those familiar gatherings. It was the way Mark's jokes made Rebecca laugh just a bit too hard,
Now
or
listen,
how their
you need
eyes
to be
would
on the
meet
next
across
train out
the
of
dinner
here. They
table
know you are the
when they
lead.
thought I was busy
It
slicing
wasn't a
pie.
radio. It
I
was
told
this.
myself it was nothing.
He heard the
Surely
music
I was
box.
imagining things, letting jealousy or some old insecurity get the better of me. Still, doubt clung to me, prickling at the back of my mind. Then there were their private conversations, short, hushed exchanges by the doorway if I stepped outside to water the ferns. The two of them would suddenly quiet when I returned, or Rebecca would change the subject in a way that felt practiced. Sometimes I'd catch the tail end of a text message, quickly tucked away when I entered the room. Her visits became less about our friendship, more about something unspoken that hung between them like cigarette smoke. There was never a single dramatic scene. No hushed confessions behind closed doors, no lipstick on a collar, only a slow unraveling, with each small interaction twisting my stomach tighter. I started keeping mental notes, watching for signs. The spark between Mark and Rebecca wasn't blatant, but it was there. Too many moments that flickered past logic, settling into my bones as a cold certainty. Truth is, there's no guidebook for what to do when you suspect something like this. I carried my suspicions around like a stone in my pocket, heavy and silent. It changed the way I saw my living room, my porch, my marriage, and the woman who'd once been my confidant. I found myself listening for secrets behind laughter, tasting bitterness in every glass of wine we shared. By winter, even the comfort of old routines couldn't drown out that creeping sense of betrayal. Something precious was slipping out of reach, but I didn't know how to name it or stop it. So I did what I always did. I smiled, asked if anyone wanted more cobbler, and watched the shadows dance across our kitchen walls as another gathering ended, leaving me more alone than before. A quiet decision. The night I decided I would not confront them outright was colder than usual for Indiana. The sky had a pink tint from the halogen street lamps, and an early dusting of snow glittered beneath our porch light. I remember pressing my forehead lightly against the frosted window, watching the shadows flicker on the lawn, arms folded tight across my chest, heart pounding for reasons I barely understood. That was when I made my choice. I would not scream. I would not shatter my life with accusations hurled in anger. I was going to be clear-eyed, patient, and meticulous, no matter how much it hurt. It wasn't strength or pride exactly that made me decide on quiet wariness. I think I just needed control, a way to hold on to reality as I felt it careening out from beneath me. So, I started paying attention. I kept my voice steady. I made coffee in the mornings, packed Grace's lunches, sorted laundry, smiled at my husband and my best friend, like everything was as it should be. I listened more than I spoke, looking for gaps in their stories, noticing the way Rachel's car was parked just a little farther down the block sometimes, hidden from a casual glance. Sending messages to myself became my secret ritual. I began journaling. At first, the act of an anxious mind, then a conscious strategy. Each odd interaction, stray text, and visit, that didn't seem right, poured into a private digital notebook on my phone, carefully coded to avoid prying eyes. Late at night, when Michael and Grace were both asleep, I'd replay small conversations in my mind, searching for what was missing. Why did Rachel come over on Tuesdays so often now? Why did Michael's shirts start smelling faintly of Rachel's signature perfume? Why were there stories about a certain movie they'd both just heard about, always slightly off, collected from each other, maybe, outside my presence? I knew my actions could be called cowardly, a betrayal of confrontation itself. But deep down, I believed that if the truth was, as I feared, it would serve no one to charge in half-cocked and empty-handed. Sometimes I thought about just asking Michael outright, "Are you and Rachel?" But the words dissolved before they reached my tongue. I needed evidence for myself to know I wasn't spinning wild from loneliness or insecurity, and for Grace, so she would never think her mother was a fool. I switched my phone password. I started using the extra dummy account Rachel herself had once helped me set up, strictly for shuffling evidence out of sight. I quietly updated our home's security system. An excuse about winter packages getting stolen made it easy enough to add a camera by the garage. I watched patterns develop. Rachel's trips to my street grew oddly frequent on mornings when Michael worked from home. I started to keep receipts, literally and also figuratively. Patterns are everything, I told myself. Patterns lead to the truth. One particular Saturday, the three of us sat together at Parker's Tavern, our spouses on either side of the table, Rachel's laugh echoing off the wood-paneled walls. I noticed how, when she touched Michael's arm to emphasize a joke, he didn't flinch away. Instead, he held her eyes for just a second too long, and my stomach curled into a cold knot. I excused myself, stepped outside into the chill night, and took 10 steady breaths. When I came back in, no one asked why I was gone so long. That night, after everyone went to bed, I marked the moment in my journal. I decided to keep every scrap. The gathering of evidence became my military campaign, though on the surface, my routines barely changed. I reached out to friends, subtly, at first, asking if Rachel seemed different lately, or if they'd noticed Michael was missing from the bowling league more often. Sometimes people offered little things. Funny, I thought I saw Rachel's car over by Ashton Street Thursday. Or, Michael mentioned a movie night, but you weren't there. All these tiny fragments formed a mosaic, a shape I dreaded, but could not deny. Over the next few weeks, I began archiving text messages and checking the history of calls on our phone bill, a tech illiterate's crash course in digital scrutiny. I stopped worrying about what people would think if they knew I was tracking my own husband. I figured all I really had left was the truth, or the lack of it. I was quiet, deliberate, almost clinical. At the end of each day, I would sweep my notes, back them up, and pray for the ache in my chest to quiet, even just for a night. I did not rage. I did not throw plates or scream at the mirror. Instead, I practiced calm smiles, and I dug in deeper, holding on to my own dignity, as if it could keep me safe. If something was ending, I would end it on my terms, with facts, not feelings, as my shield. The cracks and the slip-ups. At some point, the secrecy started to wear thin. Not on my end, but on theirs. It's a strange thing, how people who think they're being careful begin to let their vigilance slip when they grow used to deception, run down by the lies they have to keep straight. I saw it all, plain as day at times, even if they didn't know I was watching. There was the night Laura texted me by mistake. I was making dinner, stirring spaghetti sauce as Jack colored at the kitchen table. My phone buzzed. A message from Laura flashed on the screen. I didn't recognize the tone at first. It was affectionate, unusually intimate. referencing a shared memory I knew nothing about, and signing off with a little heart. I froze. Seconds later, another message from her, frantically apologizing. "Sorry, Em, that was for someone else." And then a clumsy attempt at an explanation about an old college crush reaching out. I played along. No accusations, just a smiley face and a quick reply. But I took a screenshot and added it to my file. Over the next weeks, the patterns I'd been tracking began to show real cracks. Laura left her scarf behind at our house. No big deal on its own, until I realized it was the same scarf I'd seen in the passenger seat of Sam's truck the day before. Coffee mugs appeared in strange places. Receipts appeared in the trash for meals at cafes well outside town. Sam came home with excuses about running errands that took him farther and farther from the usual hardware stores. I paid attention to how their stories aligned. A detail about a movie they'd both heard about, almost word for word, in conversations days apart. Laura referencing a TV show she'd sworn she'd never seen, but now quoted the same lines Sam had laughed at the previous weekend. I scoured our phone records and found brief, frequent calls between Sam and a number I didn't know. One I traced back to Laura after a little digging online. Again, I kept notes, each detail painstakingly entered as neutrally as possible. There were nights I wanted to scream, to throw the phone against the wall, or confront them both in a blaze of fury. But I didn't. Instead, I kept moving, quietly cataloging new evidence. I started reaching out to friends in subtle ways, asking casual questions. "Have you seen Laura much lately?" Gauging reactions, piecing together third-party snippets. Some friends let slip, almost accidentally, that they'd seen Sam and Laura together in town, shopping on a weekday afternoon when Sam was supposed to be working overtime. Others just looked away, the awkwardness heavy between us. I waited for the inevitable bigger mistake. It came one Sunday afternoon when Laura showed up earlier than expected. I'd just stepped out to walk the dog, and when I came back, I saw her car parked behind our house, tucked away as if hiding. Through the window, their voices drifted from the den. Serious, hurried. When I entered, they sprang apart. Laughter just a touch too forced. Laura left quickly, claiming she'd forgotten something on the stove at home. Sam wouldn't meet my eyes. That night, I rewound the day in my mind again and again. Every slip-up made them more reckless. They started to argue, whispering urgently on the back porch, their shadows cutting long on the snow. I wrote it all down, updated the camera logs, built my archive. Every mistake they made confirmed to me that the truth was not only hiding in the corners of our lives, but starting to spill all over the floor, out of their control. When you love someone, you never think you'll become an expert in betrayal. But by then, I had a secret file documenting every lie, every inconsistency, every proof of the cracks widening between the story Sam and Laura wanted to believe and the reality they could no longer quite hide. And still, I said nothing, waiting for the moment I knew would come. The moment the truth would finally burst out, not as a result of confrontation, but because their own carelessness had made it undeniable. The breaking point, the night I faced Rebecca again. I remember the air that evening, heavy and charged with the promise of a thunderstorm, though the weather app said Indiana would stay dry. There are some moments when you know, before they happen, that things in your life might snap for good. That's how I felt as I watched the sunlight get gobbled up by gray clouds, standing in my kitchen, bruising the hell out of some lemons, the scent sharp and familiar, grounding me to the moment. All day, my nerves buzzed in that tight, high-pitched way that used to hit me before math tests in high school.
did it.
I'd rehearsed what I wanted to
he left
say
me no choice.
so many times the words
They
pounded
would
at
hurt
my
family
temples.
if I didn't comply.
Except I wasn't sure I'd
It's
even
already dark when
speak
we got
them.
there.
My plan had
heard the
always been
shot.
to gather facts quietly, hold them close like a hand of secret cards. Still, I knew the time for silence was over. The ache in my chest told me I had to finally face what had been festering in the shadows of my home. And I needed to do it in a way neither Mark nor Rebecca could sidestep. I set it all up like I was just feeling generous. A homemade dinner, a few choice bottles of Pinot Noir, an early autumn chill that begged for the slow-cooked roast I knew Mark loved. Rebecca had asked what she could bring, but I told her just herself. My voice was calm, too calm, perhaps, though I doubt she noticed. The odd thing was, by then, I didn't feel anger. That had burned itself out over weeks of suspicion and careful observation. What remained was equal parts resignation and brittle clarity, the velocity with which you might move after a car crash, propelled by muscle memory more than conscious thought. When Mark arrived home, his eyes were tired, his usual kiss on my cheek a little off, the kind of distraction I'd begun to catalog, but no longer found surprising. I watched him unload the groceries he'd offered to pick up. I thanked him, as always, every word loaded with a weight only I could feel. Rebecca showed up 10 minutes later, wind-tossed from the drive and smelling of lavender hand lotion. She flung her arms around me, babbling about traffic and her cat. I felt myself withdraw, like my senses dulled, and forced myself to go through the motions. Meaningless chatter, drinks in the living room, Sophie coloring quietly in the corner, not understanding the undercurrents. I'd thought about inviting a crowd, maybe Amy or the Crawfords from next door. But this needed to be small. Just us, husband, wife, best friend. There's a kind of surgical precision in trimming the guest list to only the people who have something to lose. We ate in the dining room, warm light cutting gold over the table, the air thick with the smell of herbs and slow-cooked onions. My heartbeat ticked loudly in my ears as the meal stretched on, Mark asking about Rebecca's job, Rebecca joking about her students, me nodding, biting my tongue through it all. And then, somewhere between the cheesy potatoes and dessert, something inside me decided enough was enough. I set my fork down, my hands barely shaking. I took a breath, deep and cold, and looked at them each, one after the other. I need to talk to you both, I said, my voice carrying over the clatter of plates being cleared. The room stilled. Mark looked up sharply. Rebecca's smile flickered. Sophie, all innocence, glanced at us and I gave her the gentle, "Off you go," the kind every parent knows. She scampered upstairs, the only one unburdened by secrets. A hush settled, like something tangible you could slice with a knife. I let it linger a moment before reaching underneath the table for my purse. A simple black leather bag with a faulty zipper. My fingers found what they'd stashed there earlier. A small voice recorder and a folder of carefully printed emails, phone logs, and a photograph or two I'd managed to pull from backyard camera footage. My hands were steady, my decision made days before. This would not be a screaming match, but the clean, hard truth laid flat in the open. Rebecca's eyes darted to the folder, then back to mine, her smile gone entirely. Mark shifted in his chair, finding anywhere else to look but my face. I started with the facts. Dates, times, places, every small thing I'd logged. Each odd coincidence that was anything but. I spoke slowly, calmly. Years in insurance claims had taught me the value of clarity, of letting the shape of a narrative emerge on its own. When I put the first photograph on the table, a snap of Rebecca's red car backing out of our driveway in the middle of the day, a time when she should have been at school. Her mouth parted, but no sound came. "I haven't made any accusations," I said quietly. "Not until now. But I think both of you know why we're here like this. And I think you each need to be honest, for once. With me, with yourselves." The silence that followed felt bottomless. I pushed the recorder forward. No threat, just a statement of my own readiness. If either of you decide to lie to me right now, know that I probably already have what I need to prove the truth. Rebecca's voice broke first, small, trembling. "Emily." Mark swallowed, fists clenched on the table, his jaw set like he was bracing for a punch. He looked at me, and in his gaze was something close to shame, but also relief, like the strain of hiding had become too much. And, twisted as it sounds, my confrontation was a mercy. Over the next hour, there was crying. Rebecca's, mostly. Mark's apologies, thin and dry. They admitted to some, denied other things, then doubled back and admitted more. I kept my voice steady, refusing to let my hurt take over. I did not scream. I did not collapse. I let them flounder, held up the mirror with every cold detail. And when they asked what would happen now, I told them simple, unembellished truth. The next steps would not be theirs to choose. I told Mark that the lawyer already had copies of everything. I told Rebecca, who had always been like a sister to me, that I was sorry for her, but I could not save her from what she'd chosen. I was sorry for me too, but most of all, for Sophie. I told them I'd be filing for divorce, that our families and friends would know the truth, and that what they'd done would follow them, at least for a while, the way bad news always hovers in small towns. There were angry voices, Mark trying to say I was overreacting, Rebecca begging me to talk in private, but I wouldn't budge. I left them in the dining room, their world finally cracking open, and stepped outside. The air was cool now, and a storm had finally started to roll in, drops hitting the porch with gentle insistence. I sat down, letting myself breathe, the weight between my ribs easing at last. Sometimes you picture the breaking point as some explosive moment, a fight, shouting, maybe throwing things. For me, it was quieter, even sadder than I'd expected. It was just me sitting across from two people I'd once loved, realizing that the truth hurts more, but also sets you free.
Hello there.
That night,
That's a
as the
nice
storm
drawing you have.
swept through and washed our town clean, I stayed outside a bit longer, letting the rain blur the sorrow and the old faith until I was just Emily again, hurting but surviving, and, in a strange way, at peace. Legal battles and honor restored. If you've never walked into a lawyer's office with a folder full of evidence, let me tell you, it's nothing like those slick TV dramas. There are no gasps, no dramatic slamming of files on polished cherry wood desks, no clever one-liners about justice. It's just harsh overhead lighting, paper too crisp, and the heavy smell of old coffee mixed with legalese. I showed up at the Reed and Morley building the Monday after that awful night. I'd barely slept, just lay in bed, listening to the wind rattle the windows, heart dogged by aftershocks. There was something almost ordinary about sitting across from Ms. Reed, a woman with sensible shoes and a steely gaze, and pushing my folder across the desk. But handing over the evidence felt monumental, like a surrender and a small reclaiming at once. I think part of me hoped she'd find something in it that I missed, a detail that would turn this whole thing into a misunderstanding. Of course, she didn't. Instead, she leafed through photos, message transcripts, calendar notations. the sum of every moment that had twisted a knife in my chest. She was all business, but not unkind. "You realize, Emily," she said, "in Indiana, adultery won't get you more money in a divorce, but it does matter for custody, and it matters for the narrative." That word, narrative, made me blink. Suddenly, my grief and outrage had a legal category, a shape called grounds and assets and custody recommendations. There were forms, so many forms. Some questions cut. Date of first suspicion. List all incidents. Do you want to challenge for sole custody? Others were oddly intimate. Describe your typical day. What do you hope for Sophie next year? I remembered sitting at that desk, pen in hand, trying to summarize 12 years of marriage and 3 months of heartbreak in neat, legally acceptable language. After my initial consult, I met with Ms. Reed again to review next steps. She talked me through filing for separation, compiling financial disclosures, and what to expect from Mark's response when he was served. I'd learn later that he was, as always, reticent when confronted with ugliness. He barely returned my texts after I moved out of our bedroom, and the only time his voice seemed to lift was over who would keep the Ford Explorer, or whether Sophie should stay in the Girl Scouts. Word traveled fast in Little Creek. One day, my neighbor, Mrs. Reinhardt, brought over a loaf of zucchini bread and asked, just a little too gently, if everything was all right. A week later, I'd see Rebecca at the grocery store, and both of us would freeze, clutching our carts between the cereal and yogurt aisle, as if there might be some way to walk back the last half year. At the post office, old classmates met my eyes with a mixture of sympathy and hungry curiosity. In a town where everyone knows everyone, the ripple of a scandal isn't a wave, it's a flood that seeps into every crack. Mark and Rebecca moved in together, but in quiet, apologetic fashion. No Instagram announcements or housewarming parties. Just the slow, awkward fade of two people hoping, maybe, to be less notorious. I overheard someone at the beauty salon say, "After all that trouble, don't expect anyone will trust them again." Not for a while. Facing public knowledge was worse than the day in the lawyer's office. Folks didn't say much to Mark's face. Small towns know how to keep the peace on the surface. But I heard how his bowling team never called back, and he stopped going to church on Sundays. Rebecca took a leave from her school for health reasons, according to the principal. But the parents whispered plenty. Sophie's teacher called to check in, making that polite, concerned small talk that children know how to unravel later when they whisper in the back seat. For me, the hardest part was not the paperwork, or even sitting across from Mark at the negotiation table while our lawyers debated the cost of the mower. It was what came afterward. The slow and careful reconstruction of my reputation and, yes, my own sense of honor in the town I still called home. I had decided early on that I would neither slander nor hide, and this became a kind of guiding light. I let people think what they would. If they spoke poorly of me, I didn't correct them. If they spoke kindly, I tried to accept it without flinching. I would still see Rebecca's mother at the Dollar General sometimes, and she'd give me the briefest nod, apology, and shame, braided together in the gesture. The legal side lingered. Officially, it took months to finalize everything. There were depositions to give, financial records to comb through, witness statements from friends about the state of my marriage and my fitness as a mother. Each meeting with lawyers was another small act of endurance. More proof that divorce is less about blame and more about stamina and stubbornness. I fought for what I could. Sophie's future, my share of the house, the right to walk through town with my head up, even if I still heard the soft murmur of old friends gossiping at the bakery. I won some things. I lost others. Mark and I finally agreed on joint custody, with Sophie spending weekends at his place and weekdays with me. The house stayed mine, if only because no one else particularly wanted it. And I made it my mission to keep things as stable as I could for my daughter. There is still a dent in the living room wall from a chair I once stubbed my toe on during an argument years ago. Strange, the scars a home can quietly carry. The day the divorce was finalized felt almost anticlimactic. Ms. Reed handed me the stamped court order. I shook her hand, and she told me I'd done well, that I'd held my dignity. I stepped outside into the chilly May air and realized the world hadn't shifted on its axis. Still, something inside me had settled, bones knitting after a long break. It was by no means easy. There were angry emails from Mark, countless late-night doubts, stress dreams, and the sour taste of regret. Twice, I nearly called Rebecca, wanting to ask her, was it worth it? Did you plan this from the start? But I stopped myself every time. I realized, in some odd way, that revenge had no flavor anymore. What mattered, in the aftermath, was not that I had been betrayed, but that I had survived it without surrendering myself to bitterness or pettiness. Little by little, my name became just another part of the background again. At softball games, grocery store lines, and school meetings, I kept showing up, not as the woman with the cheating husband, but as Emily, Sophie's mom, the one who always buys the best pies at the bake sale. I invested in myself, too. I joined the PTA, started running with a morning group of women from the next neighborhood, signed up for a pottery class after work. At first, these were distractions, crutches to fill the hours that had once been occupied by a version of my family that no longer existed. But gradually, they became the steady routines of a person who intended not just to survive her story, but move beyond it. The town never truly forgot the scandal, but time dulled its edges. People had their own troubles. New gossip replaced the old. Mark's presence was background noise. Rebecca came back to teaching after a semester away. Interaction between us was limited to curt nods when logistics for Sophie demanded it. The wounds remained, but the urge to inspect them faded over time. Even so, every legal filing, every confrontational look across the mediation table had built up in me not a vengeful pride, but a sense of earned peace. There's something unspoken about honor in a small town. It isn't about who's right or wrong in a court document, but about how you carry yourself afterward, how you stand up when the rumor mill grinds your name down to a punchline, and how you decide to write the next chapter. I hung a new number plate by my front door. I planted dahlias around the mailbox. These small things were quiet declarations. I'm here, I'm whole, and I still belong. These were my nudges back into life, humble tokens of quiet honor, far sturdier than I could have anticipated when I first stepped into Ms. Reed's old office, folder in hand. Sometimes, legal closure does not mean emotional closure. I'd wake up on those first solitary Saturday mornings, Sophie at her dad's, the house cold and silent, and think about the changes. My laundry was half the size. The kitchen stayed strangely clean. Evenings felt like yawning chasms instead of warm rituals. But there was also space for new beginnings. Every time I received another legal envelope with my name on it, I remembered that name had survived. It would carry me forward on documents, school rosters, library cards, invitations, whatever life still had waiting. I realized my fight had never really been about property lines or parenting schedules. It had been about the stubborn determination not to be broken by things outside my control. to assert my place and my worth in a landscape I knew inside and out. I learned how tenacious I could be, organizing paperwork, advocating for myself and my daughter, answering questions from lawyers that left me drained, but oddly proud. My voice, once always scheduled around others' needs, finally belonged to me. That, I suppose, is the subtle dignity that comes on the other side of public reckoning, a type of honor I could claim not because I won more, but because at each juncture, I refused to let anyone else narrate my story for me. Sometimes, dignity looks an awful lot like doggedness. Sometimes, honor looks like continuing to plant flowers and wave politely at those who once pitied you, all while standing straighter than you thought possible. And though there will always be scars from those endless months of legal war, the conversations relived in my mind, the documents filling boxes, the looks I drew at the school bake sale, I found a kind of redemption in living honestly, choosing each morning not to let the past weigh heavier than the present. Sophie, watching with quiet, perceptive eyes, taught me that resilience gets passed down the same way recipes do, quietly, through habit and example. There's a peculiar pride in reclaiming one's dignity, not through loud proclamations or retaliation, but through steadfastness. I built a new rhythm for our little household. Pancake Sundays, just the two of us, evening story time, hikes at Oak Creek Reserve. It wasn't grand, but it was ours. Honor changed meaning for me. It stopped being about other people's approval. It became the quiet steadiness with which I opened my front door each evening, flicked on the porch light, and welcomed whatever new day chose to arrive. Somewhere along the process of divorce, public gossip, and lost friendships, I realized the only honor that mattered was the private one I forged in the quiet after everyone else had moved on. And that, finally, was freedom worth fighting for. I am free. Sometimes, freedom arrives not with a bang, but like the gentle hush that follows a summer storm. The world stirs back to life, quieter, washed clean, a little raw around the edges. For a long time, I thought the greatest battle would be proving myself, surviving the legal divorcing, or enduring the cold, public scrutiny of a place where whispers cling like dew on Indiana grass. But nothing prepared me for the after, the long, slow learning of how to step out from the weight of what was lost and to claim, piece by piece, what remained. After the court dates and the signatures and the polite but loaded farewells, my new life lurched forward. The house, my house, felt too big, too silent at first. Wall clocks ticked louder. The sound of Sophie's small shoes on wooden floors struck me as both heartbreakingly tender and painfully solitary. Every object, our chipped mugs, Tom's old work boots by the door, leftover birthday balloons, seemed to echo that I'd passed through a storm. Even the sun filtering through the kitchen window looked different, a little sharper, perhaps. Or maybe it was just me, seeing as if, for the first time, from the inside out, freedom, I discovered, was not a sudden door flung open or some bucolic prairie on the other side of suffering. It was discipline and conscious choice. Day after slow day, I set small rituals to anchor my new routines. Morning coffee on the porch, phone switched over to silent except for school calls. Sometimes I'd indulge in silly, selfish luxuries. A bought muffin, a movie night for one, buying flowers I didn't have to share. With Sophie, I managed our new schedule as bravely as I could. We painted her bedroom blue and hung up glow-in-the-dark stars. On weekends, when she was away, I learned how to befriend the stillness instead of fearing it. My first solo Saturday passed in a blur. I tried cooking a complicated meal, made too much, sat on the porch swing until the light failed and the mosquitoes drove me in. That night, I played music out loud, not worrying who could hear. I danced in the kitchen until I was breathless, half in joy and half in defiance. And when I finally sank onto the couch, it was the first time I'd truly felt my own company was enough. Rediscovering friendships became its own kind of freedom. There were inevitable tensions. Some people, unsure of whose side to take, simply drifted away, but others showed up in surprising, quiet ways. Amy, with her dry humor, the new neighbor who invited Sophie and me for barbecue, the elderly librarian who'd always saved me the latest thrillers. Slowly, I found conversation ran deeper with those who stayed. They saw the raw, honest version of me, no longer Emily the wife or Emily the betrayed, but Emily the person trying, sometimes failing, always trying again to rebuild. Work, too, became a place of subtle triumphs. Instead of shying away from office chatter about families or vacations, I told the plain truth. No more elaborate deflections or awkward lies. There was a strange pride in saying, "It's just me and my daughter these days, and I'm figuring it out as I go." The world did not fall apart. Often colleagues confided their own struggles, forming a quiet, powerful network of resilience right in the break room kitchen. I signed up for a night class, writing ironically, and each essay assignment felt like a stitch closing some internal wound. I learned that freedom is not isolation. It's having the authority to decide who enters your life, who gets to call, who gets a say. I set boundaries with Tom. Civil co-parenting became not a truce, but a discipline. We exchanged texts about Sophie's school, her favorite lunches, her growing passion for soccer, but we did not revisit old wounds, nor rifle through accusations or regrets. The conversations remained, always, about Sophie's best interests. Between us echoed the knowledge that we'd made it through something scarring, but we both refused to let bitterness shape our daughter's future. Of course, there were setbacks. Some mornings I woke up missing a life that hadn't been real for months, or maybe years. A life where trust was whole, where family photos matched reality. On darker days, the silence felt like it would swallow me, an ocean that stretched between who I'd been and who I would be. I cried sometimes, over the small remainders, like the empty passenger seat in my car, or the echo of Sophie's laughter after she'd gone to spend the weekend with her father. But I also learned to savor my own recovery, the dignity of facing the hardest truths, the pride of forging forward anyway, and finally, the sweet, slow lift of realizing I was no longer bracing for pain at every turn. Small victories accumulated in odd places, figuring out finances on my own, fixing a leaky sink by watching a dozen YouTube tutorials, saying no to events I didn't want to attend, or yes to things I'd always put off. One Sunday, I drove an hour out to a sunflower farm with Sophie and let her pick the biggest bloom, her joy radiating. That day, I realized I was starting to want things again, not out of spite or loneliness, but genuine curiosity about what new life could look like. Socially, I braced for the sting of rumors, but the town, for all its scrutiny, eventually grew bored. Fresh scandals came along, or maybe my willingness to remain open, to keep living without apology, discouraged those who might have whispered. I stopped apologizing for things that were never my fault. I stopped shielding myself from my own feelings. I attended potlucks, brought Sophie to her games, and when people asked how I was, I answered honestly. Some days are easier than others, but I'm getting stronger. I meant it. Some people smiled with relief, others with envy, but I grew less interested in tallying approval. and more invested in belonging only to myself and my daughter. The process of emotional recovery was far messier than anything I'd experienced in court. Legal closure felt procedural, yet the soul work, the part where I had to look at my reflection each day and accept this new life, was raw and slow. But with time, my mind quieted. Instead of replaying old arguments or imagined alternate histories, I began to lean into new dreams. I found freedom in tiny, radical choices. Buying new linens, no more of the good towels, saved for guests. Finally painting the living room, a color I loved. Walking barefoot in the cool morning grass, rather than rushing to meet someone else's schedule. There were, inevitably, doubts about love and trust. Would I ever risk giving anyone that power over me again? Some nights I lay awake, churning through memories of Tom's betrayal and Rebecca's duplicity, the bitterest cocktail of grief and anger. Then I'd catch Sophie's sleepy smile at breakfast, or I'd laugh so hard at an old movie in bed that I forgot, briefly, just how much had changed. I pieced together a new definition of family, maybe smaller, but fiercely loyal. I also discovered the joy of solitude. Books read, uninterrupted, lazy Sunday mornings. Music played shamelessly loud. I started noticing beauty again. The way fireflies flickered in our yard in June. The hush that falls when snow blankets the streets. The feeling of walking into my kitchen as sunlight spilled across clean counters. I cherished these, not as a substitute for what was lost, but as proof that life kept offering up small, stubborn joys if I was only willing to look. Rebuilding trust, in myself, in others, took the greatest effort. Sometimes I'd catch myself second-guessing a compliment, or pausing on a friendly text message, wary of hidden motives. Over and over, I reminded myself that the fault lay not in kindness, but in people's choices. I challenged myself to reach out more, to say yes to brunch invites, to host Sophie's sleepover, party without fear of judgment, to offer a neighbor a helping hand, even to ask for support when I needed it. Each outreach, however small, became a stitch in the fabric of a life wider than the heartbreak I'd endured. My relationship with Sophie deepened, shaped by honesty and the closeness that can only come from weathering storms side by side. Some nights, we talked long past her bedtime, about school, friends, what she missed about the old ways, and what she liked better now. I promised her, as sincerely as I could, that we would always have each other, no matter how the world spun. She grew adaptable, wise beyond her years, sometimes even offering me comfort when I doubted myself. From her resilience, I drew my own. I gave myself permission to dream new dreams. There were days I thought about travel, places I'd only ever seen in photographs. There were afternoons spent sketching ideas for a garden, or rereading old favorites and discovering they meant something different now. For the first time in years, I started keeping a journal, not to tally suspicions or betrayals, but to celebrate each small progress, each moment of grace. I wrote letters I'd never send, made lists of things I still hoped for, and marveled at how, amid the debris, possibility had blossomed again. Looking back, I can see that freedom was not really about being alone, or even about being better than before. It was about having space to breathe, to define myself outside of my marriage, outside of anyone's shadow. It's the sound of my own laughter, unmuffled by effort. It's a walk by the river at dusk, letting my hair tangle in the breeze, caring nothing for appearances. It's learning to accept every ache and scar as a part of my map. Not badges of defeat, but testimony to surviving, to growing tougher and more open at once. One evening, after Sophie had gone to sleep, I invited Amy over, and we drank wine under the porch light, talking about everything and nothing, the way we used to in college. We reminisced about lost loves, badly cut hair, teachers who nearly broke us, and teachers who saved us, about the versions of ourselves we thought were long gone. For the first time, I didn't feel broken or less than. I just felt like myself, brave, battered, stubborn, quietly hopeful. That evening felt like a reclamation. The world, mercifully, moved on. Mark and Rebecca faded into the background, a sad chapter I no longer needed to relive with every conversation. New neighbors moved in across the street, bringing new stories and fresh noise. The town itself, at last, went back to being a place of birthday parties, parades, weekend markets, and the dull, sweet rhythm I'd always treasured. My home, once a place haunted by ghosts, became filled with my own music and laughter, an entirely new constellation of love, just for me and my daughter. The most ordinary days grew precious. Sophie and I making Saturday pancakes, her giggles peppering the kitchen as syrup spilled everywhere. Movie nights tangled under blanket forts. Gardening together, her job was chief worm spotter, and watching tomato plants struggle, but stubbornly thrive. Each new tradition was ours alone. Lightweight, but infinitely sturdy. Proof that love could be rebuilt, even if it wore a different shape than before. Freedom arrived, ultimately, not as a gift from others, but as something I claimed and defended every day. Some evenings, as I locked up the house and turned off the lights, I'd catch my own reflection in the window. A little older, a little wiser, smiling softly. I was grateful, in a way I couldn't have imagined in the darkest months, for this second chance. Not just at happiness, but at honesty. If the past had taught me anything, it was that truth, even brutal, unwelcome truth, can become the soil for new growth. Sometimes, Sophie would crawl into my lap at bedtime and say, "I love you, Mom. I'm glad it's us." And every time, my heart would crack open, letting in a little more peace. I am no longer waiting for a storm. I am living, day by day, in the gentle, steady sunlight of my small Indiana town. Finally, completely free.